So today's presentation is about U.S. Embassy and Consulate's grant funding, what you need to know to apply for 2024. As I said earlier, this session is being recorded. It will be placed on the U.S. Embassy website. If you do need me to repeat something, please put a note in the chat. The session is scheduled for 60 minutes. It will begin with an overview and then will end with question and answers. However, you can put questions into the Q&A box at any time. So the U.S. mission in Australia is comprised of the U.S. Embassy in Canberra and 3 consulates in Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. So if you have any questions regarding grants and you are located in the territories served by Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth, those team members would serve you. And likewise, if you were awarded a grant, then you would be working directly with grant officers located in each of those areas. The public affairs section is in charge of engaging with Australian audiences on issues of importance to the US and Australia. We work on exchange programs, speakers, media engagements, official visits, but here today we're going to talk to you about grants, which is just one component of our work. The U.S. mission offers grants to enhance our relationship through people-to-people ties. Specifically, we support projects that support U.S. strategic priorities that include a clear connection to the U.S. and that promote an understanding of the United States and engage with Australian audiences. So think of that as a task list. You have to do 4 things: engage people to people, address U.S. strategic priorities, have a project that has some connection to the U.S., yet engage Australian audiences. So in a nutshell, those are key things to remember when applying. All right, for this grant year, we have 5 priority areas. They're listed here. They're also in the PDF of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. You need to address at least one of these strategic priorities in your grant proposal. You may address more than one, but you have to address at least one. I'm going to highlight the Indo-Pacific collaboration. We do encourage this specifically for our Pacific partners, which tend to be a lot smaller countries, but please keep in mind that this type of collaboration would be in addition to connections with the US and Australian audiences. Our priority audiences should reflect the diversity of the United States and Australia. I know that we define diversity somewhat differently, so think of this in terms of the US definition of diversity, which I've put there. Specifically, our priority audiences are younger Australians, particularly those people 18 to 35, rural and regional Australians, First Nations, and linguistically and culturally diverse communities. In general, if there's an audience that we feel has been excluded, they would be considered a priority audience. Now, what can a grant cover? Any of these things: travel, honorarium, venue hire, accommodations, personnel, supplies. If you're building a budget, please keep in mind that the grant funding is done in US dollars. And if you have a question of what might be in a reasonable amount, you can always look up what US rates are for government employees, and that will tell you what we consider a reasonable rate, and that's all public information. Some examples of projects supported in the past. I'm going to give you just a few to showcase the diversity of what we support. So for example, there was Looking to 2040, developing next generation leaders and policy thinkers of the US-Australia partnership in the Indo-Pacific. This was granted to the University of Sunshine Coast, and they worked with university students from across Australia. The students developed policy papers that were then presented to consulate leadership. This last year, Future Forte Conference convened community leaders from 43 different countries in Victoria, almost 300 people, with the focus on strengthening inclusivity in multicultural settings. A couple others were the Illuminate Far North Queensland International Science and EcoFest. This encouraged study of STEM amongst students interested in environmental issues. Or last year, we also sponsored She Runs Western Australia, which was a 2-month intensive leadership program for 20 Australian women who plan to run for political office in the future. So that gives you an idea of some of the breadth and diversity of projects. Here is a list of some past and current partners, but this is just a portion of the list. Of course, it's a much longer list. So who are eligible to apply for public diplomacy grants? You must be a not-for-profit organization. You can be from any sector. You can have a partnership with a US or Indo-Pacific organization, that they still have to have the not-for-profit status to be eligible. So some guidelines. In the past, our grants have been between $10,000 and $250,000, with many grants between the $25,000 and $75,000 range. However, you should note that for this year we have 2 new deadlines and 2 different limits. So for the March 1st deadline, the maximum limit is $50,000, whereas for the July 1st deadline, there's a $150,000 max limit. Currently, we are functioning, the US government is functioning under continuing resolution while Congress decides our budget. Therefore, we're anticipating that we will have less funding by the March 1st timeline, but hopefully more funds would be released by the July 1st deadline, hence the difference in these 2 funding amounts. And right now, there is no set amount of money that we have to provide. We know that we will have some money, and therefore we're going forward with work as usual under the continuing resolution. At the same time, we want to signal with these different amounts the reality that we're functioning under. As we know that when you write a grant, you're putting your best foot forward and you're expending energy. So we want to be a partner with you and respecting your time, but trying to be clear about what to expect. For any grants for this particular year, we have also put a maximum 12-month implementation time. So that would be from the time that you begin the grant, and you would be able to begin the grant once all the grant paperwork is signed, and that implementation date would be on the contract. So it's not from the time you enter, nor necessarily the time you put on that on your original plan. Grants can fund projects that are local, national, regional, and they can include a US or third country party, as long as they're not for profit. So just be sure that you read the notice of funding and you follow it. For the next year, we do anticipate that the notice of funding will change again. So again, to be able to apply, you need to be a not-for-profit, nonprofit organization. Under SAM's registration, you need to get a unique entity identifier, or UEI. You get that through the sam.gov site. You only need an NCAGE number if you are anticipating that your organization will receive funding from the Department of Defense. So if you have never received nor anticipate applying for this year funds from the Department of Defense, you do not need to follow that component. Remember that you need to have a US component or connection. And like all grants, of course, they require project support, progress supports, and final reports. For the application paperwork, you need a standard application, which is the application from the U.S. Embassy and consulates. You need the SF 424 application cover sheet. It's 424 for organizations and 424I for individuals. You need the proposal budget, which is the SF 424A. And on our website, all of these forms are there, as well as the instructions for how to fill out the SF 424 and 424A. What can't be funded? Here are a few common things that come up that can't be funded, but for a comprehensive list, please see page 7 of the Notice of Opportunity of Funding. So for-profit organizations cannot be funded. We do not fund partisan political activity, no fundraising campaigns, nothing that has commercial or personal benefit, and we do not fund scientific research. So the timeline, applications can be submitted anytime from the start of our fiscal year, which is October 2020, October 1st of every year. And this time through July 1st, 2024, because that is the deadline for the second and final cycle. The applications will be reviewed after the two deadlines in March and July. And applicants are generally notified 4 to 5 weeks after the review date, when because we download all of your applications, they go out to a panel and the panel makes a decision. And generally you're notified in that range, and then the contracting paperwork will begin at that point. Some final thoughts. Oh, another thing that has changed this year is that we are limiting it to 1 proposal per organization. So if you are a university and within a university you have multiple departments and potentially 3 or 5 departments would like to submit a proposal. If we do receive proposals from more than 1, we'll go back to the organization and say, which of these would you like to have for your 1 proposal? Please be clear about what the project will accomplish and why it benefits Americans and Australians. Don't let the paperwork make up your mind for you. It can be managed. The SF 424 and 424A, these are used by all organizations who apply for grants in the United States. So there's plenty of public information, as well as the grants team here in Mission Australia. We are here to help you, and you can certainly contact us for your proposal. If you do have any questions, we have 1 email. That's PAS, Public Affairs section, PAS Grants Australia at state.gov. That is the email that you can use every year, year in and year out, whenever you have questions. And now I'm going to stop the presentation and turn the floor over to you all for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mara. We've only got 1 question so far. If the project predominantly involves collaboration between Australia and US experts on a topic that is not likely to draw a large public audience, would this undermine the competitiveness of an application?
Okay, thank you for that question. No, if it's hitting an audience that's a strategic priority, the audience doesn't necessarily need to be large. That alone would have other considerations that might make it of particular interest.
Another question. So we've got some questions coming in the chat here. So there's a question about is it possible to make a time to meet with people at the embassy and consulates, to discuss like a grant proposal?
Yes, it is possible to do that. It's we will give you as much information as we can. We do have to follow guidelines to make sure that there is no conflicts of interest. But certainly, we're certainly happy to make meetings where possible. It's best to make a meeting with wherever that you'll be implementing the grant so that it's in the correct consular district. But yes, that is part of our work, both in the consulates and the embassy, is to meet with people, potentially to discuss proposals and ideas.
And if a proposal or an organization who submitted a grant last year, were to apply again this year, is that advisable, or is it a different type of grant submission advisable?
Certainly, you can apply again. Every time there is a grant cycle, you have a new pool of potential applicants, and all of the applications are reviewed. As long as they're eligible, they are all considered and ranked for funding. So just depending on the pool, how much grant funding we have to give out in any particular year, a particular proposal might be, funded or unfunded, just depending on where it falls within the rank.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mara. And should potential applicants, only get in touch to organize a meeting if they have specific questions, or is this something that everyone should be doing?
It's not required nor necessary, but certainly if you have any questions, we are here to answer those questions. We do have, I see another question in the chat of whether you're able to get feedback on why the applications are not successful. We do have limited information, but some of the information is not necessarily how could this project have been made better. It's where it falls among the priority, and every grant has to be looked at with all of our priorities together. So it might be that your grant was fine, but it just didn't meet the highest priorities for the U.S. government. And then therefore we have limited feedback to give you. But we do, whatever comments or feedback we have, we can certainly provide that.
Mara, do you know how the Indo-Pacific region is defined for the purposes of these grants?
Yes. So any country in or bordering on the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean.
Are the priorities that you mentioned earlier, are they ranked priorities, or are they all equally ranked?
No, there's no, there are 5 priorities, but they're not ranked. Those are 5 priorities, but we do, one of our mandates is to balance. So that is a balance consideration we would take in upon funding, so that we are addressing, as an organization, we are addressing all of those priorities. And so the purpose of the grants is to reach out to the Australian public to get your expertise in helping us to do that. So for example, if you're the only organization that's hitting one of our strategic priorities, that might bring your grant up in the ranking.
Okay, so that's all of the questions in the Q&A, but I can see a couple of questions that have also just popped up in the chat. So there's one sort of procedural question that there may be an issue with the forms. The forms on the website currently seen to be only instructions, SF424 and SF424A. We can look into that after this session.
Okay, thank you. This has been an ongoing issue that we're trying to resolve, so I will look at that again immediately after the webinar. And I can certainly send all of the forms as well as this presentation to everyone that's joined us. And we will be putting the recording on the website as well.
And one more question that's just come through in the chat. What are some good and bad ways that university applications can seek to meet the people-to-people criteria? Do academics count as people?
Of course. So if you look at some of the previous grantees, that might give you an idea. Like having a conference, having a student exchange. There's been many. I feel like when we do give examples, it tends to be more of a cookie cutter approach, and I feel like the grantees most likely to be awarded have very innovative ideas, or they reach audiences that we haven't reached before. So we in the past we used to provide an example, but because if organizations went toward like a recipe or a cookie cutter approach, they were less successful. We stopped doing that.
So a couple more questions coming up in the Q&A here, Mara. So I know that this session is being recorded. Perhaps you can talk to how that will be sent out, and if it's all right for people to, share this opportunity with their institutions and their connections.
Certainly, and it will be put on our public website, on the U.S. Embassy website. The recording will be sent out as a link, and the other files will be sent out as files, but you are welcome to share them. This will be public information. All of the forms we have, except for the 2 application forms that are specific to Australia, the SF424, the 424I, these are public forms already. So if you do a basic internet search, you will find them as well.
Wonderful. There's another question, Mara, about the regularity of these grants. So are they yearly? And if someone were to develop a project for, say, November 2025, is it best to apply for next year's application rounds?
Yes, they are yearly. You're certainly open to apply both times. Our funding varies cycle to cycle, year to year. And also remember that the United States is in an election year. So typically our strategic priorities change every time we have an administrative turnover. So if that happens, you can expect that our strategic priorities will differ as well.
So those are currently all of the questions that we have in the Q&A and in the chat.
Okay. If there's anyone on that also that was looking more toward the research avenue, the U.S. government does give research funding also. In general, you can find all opportunities through a site called grants.gov. And you can filter to know whether an international or an Australia-based organization would be eligible. Often it does require partnership with a U.S. organization. Similar to this opportunity, we require a connection with the U.S. But that grants.gov lists all of the different funding opportunities that the U.S. government has available.
So we've just had another question come through, Mara, and one of the attendees has their hand up. They're the same person that's asked the question. So do we need to do the federal tax application every year? And Tracy, if you could just confirm that if you want to speak, perhaps, let me know.
Do we need to do? I do not know the answer to that question, Tracy, about do you need to do the federal tax application every year? I do know that we require the federal tax application to receive the funding. If you are applying to any US sponsored grants, I would definitely encourage you to do that. All of our grants do require registration with SAM. So, and if actually, just knowing the nature of your organization, I would recommend that you apply every year, simply because that will make you eligible to apply for funding, and I wouldn't want to miss out on eligibility for something for like a procedural issue.
One more question that was missed that I thought had been answered but had not. If someone is applying for a grant in Queensland, which consulate would oversee that?
Let me find it. That would be Sydney.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mara. I cannot see any more questions for the time being.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us. Again, if you do have any questions, you can reach us at PAS, P-A-S, Grants Australia at state.gov. And we look forward to working with you and to seeing your great ideas. Thank you.